My name is John Reynolds. Welcome to this episode of Venture Visionaries. On this episode, I'm joined by Steve Bolton, Tash Courtenay-Smith, and Scott Weavers-Wright OBE. Scott, Tash, Steve, thanks for joining me. Scott, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a UK entrepreneur, aged 52. Started my first business when I was 18. On my 18th birthday, I left home and straight into the world of business, and very bumpy, and went into the Prince's Trust to grab a loan. And long story short, I've sold two businesses for about $150 million, and employed 2,500 people along the way, and still do. So, but I am now no longer the employer. I'm the underlying investor as I run a VC fund called Hatch.
Cool, thank you, Scott. Tash.
How do I follow that? I'm going to take a leaf from your book. I'm a UK entrepreneur. I'm 46. Had my first business at the age of 27, which was a journalism and media business. I sold that in 2014, and since then I've had several businesses. I've sold two more, built a 7-figure marketing agency, and currently have businesses that revolve around retail, e-commerce, media and marketing. So I have a couple of shops in Portobello Road, and D2C Live, which is a leading UK e-commerce conference, supports a community of 3,500 British brands.
That's awesome, Tash. Thank you. Steve.
And BizKids?
Oh, and BizKids, yeah, thanks.
There you go.
I also run a free program to teach kids entrepreneurship every Monday at 4:30 called BizKids.
Oh, amazing.
And the reason I do that is because once I started learning things about business, I thought, God, I should have learned this when I was like much younger, and I could have got started much sooner.
We will come back to that, 100%. Steve.
Cool. So I can't follow either of those. So, left school at 16 with no qualifications. Started my first business when I was 21. On paper was a millionaire by the time I was 30. And then by the time I was 32, I managed to lose it all. Had to sell my family home to avoid bankruptcy. And then, been an entrepreneur really for 30 years, 15 years as an angel investor, and sold out of a business in 2020. And have launched an angel fund where we invest in mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to change the world using technology in the field of mental health, sustainability, those types of things. And just absolutely love business, love mentoring young entrepreneurs, people that had the drive that I had 30 years ago, 20 years ago, steer them in the right direction and share my experience. So
that's invaluable. That's awesome. Thank you, guys. Tash, I'll ask you first, and then you guys can answer. If you're looking at an opportunity, an investment opportunity, how important is the entrepreneur and everything about them and the opportunity itself? What's more important to you? What would make you go for investing in a business?
I think that's a really good question to ask me, because most of my investments would be in e-commerce, which is an incredibly complicated and increasingly complicated space, almost like a nightmarish sector. So for me, and there's so many products and so much competition. So for me, the entrepreneur is really crucial, because I want to know that they can operate a lot of it so that they can protect themselves, because there's going to be so many curveballs thrown their way into that type of business and that type of business model. So if I think about things I've invested in, it's always come down to, okay, this is a nightmarish space. I understand it, and this person also understands it. I know that they can do it. So if anyone can make this work, this person can. So they've got to have the technical abilities. So I look quite closely at the person, actually, as well as then things like the brand and the product. I think there's a lot of amazing products in the world and a lot of great brands, but operating them is not as simple as just having a great product.
Yeah, well said. Scott?
I think tech is becoming a commodity. Back in my day when we built Kiddie Care, we had to assemble technology. Invent technology. But now if I go onto the Google platforms and the other platforms out there, really tech's a commodity, and I look at the founders as the inspiration behind the product and behind the brand. So they're very key for me. I have to accept that the reality is also, I'm a very much data-driven investor in addition to the entrepreneur. I've made many investments, and I've made many mistakes by backing in the individual if the product's not good enough, if the idea is not good enough because they're inspirational, therefore I back them. I think it's a 2 + 2 = 4 for me.
Interesting. Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, there's an old quote, I don't know if it was Thomas Edison, I think he said, success is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. We were talking earlier about just execution and the ability, not just for an entrepreneur, but for them to be able to build a team, lead a team, and execute. So for me, that's really, really important, as well as the timing. I think it's a under-recognized critical success factor that I've had businesses that have gone really well because I was just at the right inflection point when that market was growing. I've also had businesses that have not succeeded because it's been on the downward trend or it's been too early. So I think that understanding of timing of what it is a company's doing is really important as well.
Yeah, I can parallel that timing. And of course, sometimes there's unforeseen events, whether it's COVID or credit crunch, and that could be a massive influence on the business and potentially no one's fault. Have you, as a panel, got any experience and elaborate on a failure, something that's gone wrong? There's success here with all three of you. I want to know something that didn't go well and perhaps what you learned from it. Steve?
Got quite a lot, quite a few failures. So biggest failure I really had was I lost a business, or two businesses actually, in 2001, 2002. You're talking about external events. So we had September the 11th, the terror attacks in New York. I had a management consulting business at the time, making £500,000 a year profit, net profit. And that went back to break even because all the big companies cut their budgets, training, entertainment, travel, and we were in that sector. At the same time, as a double whammy, the previous pandemic before COVID that we experienced in this country was foot and mouth disease. And we used to build adventure ropes courses for places like Center Parks, all the treetop adventure trails, my company that built those. The guys couldn't go on land and build anything because there was a restriction because of foot and mouth disease. So had to put that business into voluntary liquidation. So Scott and I were talking about failures earlier, and it was the best, worst experience of my life. It was incredibly painful at the time, laying off staff, not knowing how I'm going to keep paying the mortgage and having to move into a rented bungalow with a newborn baby. Really, really challenging time, but it taught me so much. It taught me about resilience, that I could get through it. It's not as bad as you think it's going to be. So that's probably my defining failure, which is one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Interesting. Tash?
My failure is a lot more amusing than that, in that I've always operated, since 2008, I've had businesses in Portobello Road, so I know that road very, very well. And the whole ethos of my businesses there are about creating souvenirs that people want to buy. They're coming to Notting Hill because it's a special place. So I created these. I remembered how as a child I'd loved going to Switzerland and buying the Swiss national dolls. So I created these souvenir dolls for Notting Hill. And this mistake was overestimating my own ability. It was a massive, arduous process to create a doll, have it designed, customized packaging, safety, etc. You probably know this from your businesses relating to children. So anyway, I imported these dolls. At the same time, I was heavily pregnant. I actually went into labour, and this sort of huge shipment arrived in Felixstowe. And I just really messed it up. Like, I messed up the whole thing, from the timing of the shipment arriving, the size of the shipment, everything about it had just been like underestimated on my part, and I had to kind of abort the whole thing because I was also in hospital with a newborn baby, which wasn't ideal. But when I look back on it, I think, God, I did really mess that up, because I created something really beautiful. There's no doubt the popularity of these items, dolls, the popularity of Notting Hill, it was my execution of it and the timing of doing that while I was pregnant and overestimating it, overestimating my ability. I thought, it will be fine, and it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame, because that shouldn't have happened, and it wouldn't have happened if I'd managed it better.
Okay, but then you learned from it. You knew exactly why it failed. And
Yeah.
Scott?
Well, I can go deep, but failure is an event, not a person. And I think you need to repeat that a few times to understand it. My first business, I was 18 years old. IBM compatible computers, took it from me to 20, 25 people. I was the youngest employee. And about the age of 25, newborn baby, about the age of 25, one bank and one another, which will remain nameless, changed their payment terms from 30 to 90 days. £2.5 million turnover, couldn't keep the business. I had just got an advisor who just recommended moving to a bank. And I went to that bank and they said, no. And I lost that business. And I had personally guaranteed £300,000 worth of bills. So it's a real interesting curve. You certainly find out who your friends are and the extremes of failure. But I have to say, it's an event, not a person. What my learnings were is that I gave credit, but I wasn't a bank. I employed lots of people, but I really didn't have the cash flow. And when you work that out, I came to London as a result, as a consultant. I billed 100 hours in advance, ironically, to the banks, and I contracted my employees rather than employ them at that stage, and paid back my debts, and actually paid off my mortgage, and then started Kiddie Care. So I say you have to take the learnings out of it, but failure is an event, not a person.
So you learnt very early the importance of cash flow. Horrible lesson to learn, but I guess learning that stood you in good stead for Kiddie Care and everything that came after that.
Yes. What was special about Kiddie Care was a family business, and it was very thrifty, and it was a very get stuff done today because tomorrow's a new day. Classic entrepreneur. We haven't got VC money, therefore we have to execute. We need to make margin. We need to sell goods. We have to sell the goods because we need the money in the bank. Classic corner shop mentality, which went big with scale when I computerized or led the transformation program of it. So but the reality was cash is king, and you never forget that in business. And when it's your money and your business, you can't forget it. Yeah.
You mentioned scale there. I was going to ask the three of you how important it is when you're looking at an opportunity to scale is, and how far-reaching that can go. Because you spend a lot of time and effort researching, due diligence and so on before you get into business. If you can scale a business far and wide, ultimately that's going to be a far better return on investment. So how important is scale to you?
For me personally, it's massive. I started with businesses that were very small in scale without really realizing it. So it's a kind of a strategic decision. How many people do you know want a high and low ropes adventure course or a death slide? There's not many, right? And we built them and they had a 25-year guarantee. I moved into property. You can, I think there's an old saying that 90% of millionaires make their money through property. And then like Scott, 90% of billionaires make their money through being a fund owner or fund manager. And so for me, it's a combination of, I look for businesses that can have £1 billion valuation, but can also positively impact more than 1 billion people. So for me, scale is really important because I've been on that journey. And if I'm going to put, you've only got so many hours in a day that you're going to work. And actually I would rather put that effort into things that could be absolutely massive. It's a personal choice. That's not right for every entrepreneur, because the bigger you get, the more problems, challenges, risks.
Potentially more risk.
That there are, yeah. But, so for me, really, really important. It can positively impact 1 billion people and become a £1 billion plus business.
I did that with property, spending that much time on 1 or 2 or 100, 150 units, ultimately much more money to be made at the end of it, but potentially a lot more risk. What about you, Tash?
Well, it's an interesting point about the different ways of operating. all the businesses I've operated have been bootstrapped, a bit like what you were talking about, Kiddie Care, like keeping them profitable, getting the work done at as low cost as you can, so that the business is always profitable, and then but maintaining that does hinder its growth. So I can see both parts of it. I think in the things I've invested into, it's been a different mentality. If there's an entrepreneur who wants to do that and go on that huge scaling journey and has that ability to do that, then I think that's fantastic. But it does come down to an individual person whether or not you want to do that yourself or just invest in people who do want to do that.
Yes, absolutely. What about you, Scott?
2 answers from me, really. When you start a business, 20 years ago, when you start a business, it wasn't about being a billionaire or reaching 1 billion consumers. It was about survival. And that's something we know. Richard Branson says it's about survival. So you can be in the game tomorrow. And I listen a lot to Richard and I read all his books, and he's a fantastic guy. But it is about being in the game. When we started, it was about survival and creating a really good business that ultimately had foundation to scale. As an investor, clearly, I'm absolutely, I agree with the panel. It's all about shooting for the stars and going for the $1 billion valuation, because that's the unicorn. That's what we all want. The reality is something different. I have a portfolio of 70 businesses, 20 million, 30 million, 40 million exits are probably, we're gratefully received. But the reality is we all want to shoot for the $1 billion, but the reality is something different.
Yeah. But by default, all 3 of you are entrepreneurs. So you know what you're looking for when you're going to invest in an entrepreneur. What would be the key attributes that you would look for in somebody, probably reminding them of yourself a bit of them in the context of, so start with you, Tash. What's so important to you in an entrepreneur?
Their capability and ability to execute and get whatever it is done. I think there's a lot of sort of, particularly, I mean, you've mentioned how £1 billion exits, whatever, weren't a thing 20 years ago. I mean, that's true. I think there's been a lot of evolving in how we see entrepreneurship and how it should be, thanks to social media, where there's enough success stories of people becoming billionaires that enough people try and do it. And I see that somewhat as a modern day trend. So I think it's fine. Obviously, people are doing that, and that's great. But what I think, I'm always thinking, it's quite simple. Can this person actually do what they say they're going to do or not? And that's quite a simple way of looking at it. I think it's really important.
Interesting. Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I think I agree with Tash in that if I'm investing in a business, I want it to go big. But also, sometimes I've got one entrepreneur at the moment that wants to do a business with 100 million in revenue. He's currently doing about 3.5. And but it's really affecting his mental health, right? And so you sort of think we've all been on a journey of scaling up, and it's not easy, right? And so I just said, is that what you really want? Because actually sometimes he's got a profitable business. If he actually cut a few staff and ran it, he'd be earning £500,000 a year, right? And
where's that drive coming from? What's influencing him to want that business to be, when it's already sounding like it's doing well? Yeah, no,
it's doing very well. He's built an amazing brand, but he's got friends around him that have had a 10 million exit or a 90 million exit, so it's partly that, partly his nature, that he's just driven to go big. Partly, when I was in my 20s, I wanted the fast cars and the big house and the holiday homes, and my philosophy's kind of changed quite a lot over time, because I think there's a real danger for people like us sharing the story of our success to young entrepreneurs that think, oh, I'll only be successful if I achieve that. And when actually success really, if you boil it down, is about fulfillment in lots of different areas of life. Have you got more money coming in every month than you've got going out? Are you saving? So for the majority of the population, going big is not necessarily the right thing. As investors, we want them to go big. But I think for most people, it's actually about, are they achieving their goals? Are they clear what their goals are? And if you want to shoot for the moon, great, but don't think it's easy, because it absolutely isn't.
That's really interesting. Scott, what is it you look for in an entrepreneur?
I think it's difficult when you look at people to see the lens or the mirror. Do they remind me of me? I think we have. I think there's various stages of entrepreneurship, and I think currently in the VC stage or the software stage or the SaaS stage, we're in this. These could be £1 billion pound businesses. As a retailer, we're about survival, about making a brilliant product, about selling, about margin, and about repeating that and enjoying it and enjoying the ride and having some fun and being in control of your own destiny, because you're your own boss. So I do have something, and I am quite bitter and twisted about it. When I was struggling in the early days, I couldn't pay my VAT bill, and eventually they turned up with a van, bailiffs. Big truck, came into the computer store, took the computers, took the tables, took everything, and left me with a carpet. And I sold my wife's car, and simply to pay the £6,000 or whatever it was, I think it was 6,000, and I got all that back. So I'm survived, I'm back in the game. Do I see that in the eye of the founders today when I invest VC money? In those days, it was my money. Bankruptcy was on the agenda if I didn't make good. The reality is, what will the new entrepreneurs do to survive? And I worry sometimes about that lack of credibility in their argument. Funded businesses should do X and execute if they've got the right skills and if they have the right product market fit, and where does it go from there? When it goes bad and they're in trouble, how far will they go to keep the business alive and survive and protect my investment and protect them as well? Yeah. And that's what I worry about. So when I look at people, it's hard to compare against me, because I will go all the way.
Yeah, because you're looking for that hunger, that drive, that ambition, but also to stand by what they're doing and investors' money and see something through.
I think it's sometimes easy to stand in front of an investor and create a blue sky thinking model. And I love it, and I love the aspiration to be huge, but you have to survive, you have to build a platform, you have to build a business that is capable of moving forward. And a lot of people in the past are blue sky thinkers but can't execute in the weeds.
No.
That's what I see.
Tash mentioned biz kids at the beginning of the intros. The education system feels to me like it was designed for people to come through and get a job at the end of it. We're all entrepreneurs here. What's needed in the curriculum and what's needed at an earlier stage, fair play, entrepreneurial side of things, I hope it absolutely flies, but it's not mainstream. Kids are just not being taught. And dare I say, having that drive and ambition instilled to do something for yourself and try and change the world for better. What do you think can be done? Apart from programs like this, what needs to be done to help? Yeah, you go first.
So in Biz Kids, I teach kids aged 7 to 13, and really what I'm trying to teach them is not that they should be entrepreneurs, but that there's 2 different routes in life, and they might want to reach for one or another or at various stages. And to teach them broader skills I teach them financial literacy, maths, P&Ls. They're very good, these kids, at generating profit, turning around failing businesses. They're really skilled. But I'm trying to make them see from the broader picture that opportunities are everywhere, that they do have control over their own destiny, that they can just pick up something and that you don't have to do something that's amazing. For me, getting into entrepreneurship was purely about, oh God, I was working in the Daily Mail. It was a very corporate environment. It would have been very difficult to have kids and work there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to want kids, so I need to get sorted so I'm not in a corporate environment. It fitted that time and I've stayed in it, but I didn't have to stay in it forever. And I want those kids and biz kids to understand that opportunity is everywhere, that they can take control of their own thinking and their own life at various times, and that there's different routes in life and they might want to have one at one stage or another. And I think that should be what's widely taught across the education system. I mean, this year in GCSE business is like the most popular subject. It's been completely inundated because even kids themselves are realizing that actually they're learning about whatever they learn about in school, tutors and whatever the usual curriculum that we all had. It's not much changed, but the world has really changed, which is why these kids themselves are electing for GCSE business. It's quite late, by the age of 14, 15, to introduce them to this world. I've got 7-year-olds who are perfectly capable of understanding how to turn £30 into £3,000, for instance.
Oh, I love that. Well done. What about you?
Yeah, for me, I have a passion for mentorship. Mentoring. I've mentored over 2,000 individuals. Helped them start over 600 different companies. And so I think you're only ever one person away from solving any problem in your life, and quite often that's a mentor. Could be a parent, could be a friend, could be somebody that you meet, somebody that you pay. But I think mentorship is absolutely fundamental for kids as well as adults, but for kids, they're best mentors, or worse sometimes, parents, so I try and be a good dad, a good uncle, a good grandfather, all of those sorts of things, but spread that out further. So for me, like mentorship about some of the things Tash is talking about, it's not just the business skills, right? Not everybody is built to be an entrepreneur, but everybody needs, I think a mentor's most important job is to believe in the person more than they believe in themselves and give them that self-belief. And I've just done that because sometimes just one little sentence or one thing that you might say, it's like moving the angle of a head on a golf club. A tiny degree is the difference between a hole in one and going in the lake. And I think that's true in life as well. So
100%. I think the mentoring, so it's my definition of mentoring is being taught, right? And so it's not just classroom stuff, it's arm around you, it's checking they're okay. And I know you've got great experience with that. I mean, again, question to you, but.
Well, yeah, I have actually, because I was just thinking what would have happened if I had a mentor at 18, 19 when I started. And arguably I did. I came through the Prince's Trust programme when I was 18, received a £5,000 loan because the banks turned me down. And I had a couple of mentors. One stayed with me for life, and he was great. Apprenticeship. I did YTS at 16 to 18, paid £35 a week, and actually in that computer store in Peterborough, I was inspired to at the age of 18 to say, I tell you what guys, I'm not going to take the job that's been offered, I'm going to jump ship and do it myself. And and that is the result clearly of my version of an apprenticeship. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of university. I am for kids and young guys and girls who need to go to be a doctor and a pilot and X, Y, Z, but not for the sake of it. I think apprenticeships are the way forward. Yeah. Practical skills.
Awesome. I would love to keep this conversation going, but we're going to run out of time. But in terms of mentoring and learning, I've learned loads from this conversation, let alone just anyone watching. So Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tash. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.